Hello, thank you for joining us for our weekly witnessing tip.
Yes, it's good to be here. And Gina, what's one of the kind of more common principles that we have been talking about over the last year when it comes to witnessing?
I think one thing that you have really driven home is use what's currently happening to get into a witness.
Right, what is currently happening. And this is a hard test now, a hard question for you, Gina. But what might be the current happening this week that we could use for a witnessing tip?
I believe tomorrow is the 4th of July.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So, that is currently the big thing on the calendar.
Okay, and what do we think about when we think of the 4th of July? What do people think?
In addition to fireworks,
Right.
because you see fireworks stands everywhere right now.
Right.
Freedom, right?
Independence Day, freedom,
Yeah.
right? And so what I'm going to really encourage you this week to do is think of that word freedom, because that's kind of the hook that we want to use. And the Bible passage is Luke 4:18, where Jesus, in the beginning of his ministry, he was quoting the Old Testament, and he says, "He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners." So that was Jesus' mission, to proclaim freedom and to actually win freedom. So now the big question is, how can we bridge from the Independence Day or freedom to this passage?
Right.
And the way I like to do that often is maybe just using that word freedom and talk not so much about a national freedom, but personal freedom. And there's just a couple of personal stories that I could share. For example, my uncle, during World War II, he was actually shot down 3 or 4 times, but the last time he became a prisoner of war. And he always talked about how General Patton came and rescued them, and he was just so grateful for what Patton did. And so he didn't talk that much about being a prisoner of war, but it was very personal. The one that I remember personally is one time I was in Chicago flying back to Idaho, and went out to my gate, and there's just all these newspapers, news reporters and everything, TV reporters, I go, kind of what's going on. And as we went onto the plane, we were told one of the hostages from Beirut, that was years ago, one of the hostages from Beirut was on the plane. He had just been freed after 4 or 5 years in captivity. And they said, he's in first class, just walk by, don't say anything to him, just because he's kind of dazed. And his name was Jesse Turner. He was from Boise. And the rest of the plane was, whatever seats were left were filled up with news reporters and so forth. And when we landed in Boise, we had to stay on a plane. They had a stretch limousine for him waiting to take him off. And even though it was kind of in the middle of winter at midnight, they had this big celebration at the State House for Jesse. And it just reminded me what a difference in that man's life from being captive to the freedom and the great celebration and everything, right? And so what I would probably do is on the 4th of July, talk about freedom and just maybe tell that story and then say, but you know what? I have lived that story because of what Jesus has done.
Right.
I was a captive of sin and Jesus freed me and so forth. So I would really encourage you to try maybe find a story. Do you have any kind of story like that?
Yeah, no, I don't have any neat personal stories like that. So how would I do that?
Yeah, how would you do that? I think you could, I think in the news or even on movies, there's a lot of, stories about captives being freed, but I think in the news these days there's this innocent project going on where they are finding people who are innocent and they have been imprisoned for many years. I think you can, think about things in the news or in the movies or something and just say, I was just really thinking on Independence Day about these people who were in the prison for like 20 years and now are free, and then bridge over to the freedom we have. So, I would just encourage you to try to find something, give it some thought.
Right, and I mean, what an easy conversation that is to get into, especially tomorrow,
right?
4th of July.
Yeah.
That's just a very natural one that could occur.
Yeah, and so I would really almost challenge everybody to find a way to talk about freedom this weekend, with somebody, and then talk about Luke 4:18, Jesus came to proclaim freedom for us, and he actually did that. I guess that's going to be my challenge to you this week is and it doesn't always have to be with an unbeliever either. I mean, we can encourage each other, right?
Yeah.
By just talking about our freedoms.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it if you take him up on the challenge.
Yeah.
And comment below and share your stories with us.
Right, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, have a great 4th of July.
Yes,
And
see you next week.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.